seeing a human being there at an area that was unfamiliar with the tiger.
What drives a person to jump into a tiger's den or walk up to a lion's cage as if it were a pet?
Chilling new video and audio just released from deputies who responded to that tiger attack at a Florida zoo. We do want to warn you, it may be difficult to watch.
Around the world, zoos have seen moments that defy logic and end in disaster. Some are reckless, some heartbreaking, and others are simply breathtaking. These moments, all caught on camera, reveal how quickly fascination can turn into fear, and how a single bad decision can end in disaster. Tiger attack at Naples Zoo. It began like any other night at the Naples Zoo in Florida. A 26-year-old maintenance worker named River Rosenquist was finishing his shift. He wasn't a zookeeper. He worked for an outside cleaning company. But for reasons no one ever fully understood, he walked into a restricted area near the tiger enclosure, a place clearly marked with warning signs that no one should ever enter. Behind the fence waited Eco, an 8-year-old Malayan tiger, a powerful predator weighing nearly 270 kilograms. River leaned closer to the cage, possibly trying to pet or feed it. The moment his hand passed between the bars, Echo struck. The tiger lunged forward, clamping its jaws around River's arm with crushing force. Bodycam footage from responding officers later captured the horror that followed. River screamed for help, his voice breaking as he cried, "Please!" "I'm gonna die," the tiger growled, pulling harder with every movement, shaking him like a rag doll. Blood sprayed across the concrete. A sheriff's deputy arrived within minutes. He shined his flashlight through the fence, shouting and banging on the metal to scare the tiger off. It didn't work. The tiger's eyes glowed in the beam of the light, fixed on its prey. The deputy aimed his gun. For a few agonizing seconds, he hesitated, then pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the zoo. Echo let go and backed away into the shadows. River collapsed to the ground, his arm shredded and hanging by torn muscle. Officers dragged him out as he screamed in pain. He was airlifted to a nearby hospital and miraculously survived, though his injuries were devastating. The next morning, the zoo confirmed what many feared. Echo had died from the single gunshot. The news hit hard. The tiger was a rare, protected species, one of fewer than 200 Malayan tigers left in the world. The footage was haunting to watch, raw, violent, and real. It showed how thin the line is between fascination and tragedy, and how one careless reach toward the wild can destroy 2 lives in a matter of seconds. Woman jumps into a tiger enclosure for her hat. It all began with a strong gust of wind. It suddenly swept across the zoo like it had a score to settle. Hats flew, napkins danced in the air, and a woman's wide-brimmed sun hat soared up, twisted midair, and landed right in the middle of a tiger enclosure. At that point, most people would have sighed dramatically, maybe cursed under their breath, and accepted that the hat now belonged to the tigers. But not this woman. Without a second thought, she marched right up to the barrier, swung her leg over it like she was hopping a picket fence, and dropped straight into the enclosure. The crowd went dead silent. People gasped. A father whispered, "Oh my God," while instinctively reaching for his phone. Everyone just stood there, frozen, eyes locked on the woman who had apparently decided her hat was more valuable than her life. Inside the enclosure, a Sumatran tiger was only a few feet away, and it was watching closely. It didn't pounce, but you could tell it was curious, maybe even sizing her up. The tension was so thick you could practically hear everyone holding their breath at once. The woman, somehow calm as a cloud, strolled over to her hat like she was in the middle of a park. She bent down, dusted it off like she had just dropped it in her own backyard, then casually turned to walk back toward the barrier. She didn't run. She didn't panic. Thankfully, there was a second protective barrier inside the enclosure. That invisible line was most probably the only thing keeping her from becoming breaking news. According to a zookeeper who later spoke out, the tiger could have crossed that secondary barrier in a matter of seconds if it had wanted to, and it very nearly did. Zoo staff came rushing in right after, but by then, the whole scene had already been recorded by about a dozen stunned bystanders. Within hours, the video was everywhere online. People watched in disbelief. Some called the woman fearless. Others called her completely out of her mind. In the end, the woman walked away without a scratch. And yes, with her hat. 3 strongmen versus a lion in tug-of-war. This one looked harmless at first. 3 professional strongmen arrived at a zoo to test their power against a lion in a tug-of-war. The idea was simple. The lion would hold one end of the rope, and the 3 men would pull from the other. The crowd gathered, laughing and cheering, confident the men could at least put up a fight. The lion didn't look interested. It lay in the shade with the rope between its teeth, barely moving. The referee signaled the start. The men dug in, gripping the rope tight. Their muscles bulged, veins stood out, and their faces turned bright red as they leaned back with everything they had. But nothing happened. The rope didn't move, not even a little. Then the lion shifted. It stood up, planted its paws, and gave one short, lazy pull. The rope snapped toward it so fast that the men stumbled forward. One nearly fell face first into the dirt. In less than 3 seconds, the contest was over. The crowd gasped, then laughed in disbelief. The lion had barely tried. The strong men looked stunned. One muttered, "It felt like pulling a car." Another just dropped the rope and walked away. The message was clear. Strength is relative and next to a lion. Even the strongest humans don't stand a chance. Orangutan interacts with pregnant woman. Naomi Davies was 4 months pregnant when she visited Twycross Zoo in the UK with her fiancé. They were walking past the orangutan enclosure when she stopped for a moment. She leaned gently against the glass, rubbing her baby bump. It was a normal moment, nothing dramatic. Then, something amazing happened. A young orangutan came over, walking slowly with its mother. The little one looked at Naomi, then pressed its lips against the glass, right where her belly touched it. The mother orangutan watched quietly. Her eyes were locked on Naomi. There was no fear, no confusion, just curiosity, and maybe understanding. The crowd didn't say a word. No one moved. It felt like time paused. Naomi was emotional. She later said it felt like the orangutan knew what was happening, like one mother recognizing another. It wasn't just adorable, it felt meaningful. Even the zookeepers said they had never seen anything like it. And yes, we're talking about people who watch animals all day for a living, but not all stares through glass are this heartwarming. Lioness attempts to pounce on toddler behind glass. At a zoo in Shenyang, China, a family stood in front of the lion enclosure. A toddler walked up to the glass, holding his little juice box, just inches away from a full-grown lioness. At first, everything seemed fine. The lioness was standing at the other end of the enclosure. She looked calm. Then she crouched down, her eyes locked onto the child. It wasn't merely curiosity. It was something else. It looked like hunting behavior. The lioness lowered her body. Her muscles tensed. Then, in an instant, she launched forward and slammed into the glass with full force. The sound was like a car crash. The parents screamed. The toddler cried. People nearby ran back in fear. Luckily, The thick glass held, but the message was clear. This was not a sleepy zoo animal. This was a predator, a real one. And if that glass hadn't been there, it would have been a completely different story. The zoo later confirmed the glass was reinforced and designed to handle that kind of impact. Still, it left visitors shaken. One person said, "I knew it was safe, but it still scared the life out of me." Goose defends family against giraffes. At Brookfield Zoo, a goose was out for a peaceful stroll with its goslings. You'd think nothing could go wrong. Then, 3 giant giraffes wandered a bit too close. Big mistake. The goose was not having it. Out of nowhere, this small, angry bird launched into full attack mode. The goose started honking like a broken car alarm, with its wings flapping like crazy. And believe it or not, the giraffes froze. These towering animals, each probably 100 times the size of the goose, looked genuinely confused. One even took a step back. People watching from the other side of the fence couldn't believe it. Some laughed so hard they had to sit down. One kid shouted, "That goose is the boss now!" The giraffes didn't even try to fight back. They just slowly walked away, probably wondering what just happened. The goose stood its ground, still flapping and puffing its chest, like it had just won a heavyweight title fight. Feeding the fish. A swan's surprising gesture. At a zoo in Guangdong Province, China, something happened that made people stop and watch, then scratch their heads. A pair of black swans were spotted dipping dry food pellets into the water before eating them. That alone wasn't shocking. But then, something curious followed. As they dunked the pellets, koi fish gathered underneath, waiting for scraps. And here's where it got weird. Some of those soggy pellets dropped from the swans' beaks, and the fish snapped them up, again and again. It looked almost like the swans were feeding the fish. Visitors watched in silence. Some whispered things like, "Are they doing that on purpose?" It definitely looked like they were. Zoo staff later confirmed that this wasn't a trained behavior. The swans weren't taught to do this. It just sort of happened. Over time, through repetition, the interaction evolved naturally. The swans softened their food. The fish figured out when to show up. The two species formed a strange little partnership. One guest said, "It felt like watching neighbors share snacks over the fence." Was it kindness? Was it a coincidence? Who knows? Whatever it was, it worked. The polar bear who danced. At a zoo exhibit, families gathered around the polar bear enclosure expecting the usual. Some walking, maybe a swim, maybe a nap. Instead, they got a show none of them expected. The polar bear started to move, not pacing, not rolling, but dancing. Well, sort of. It swayed side to side, shifted weight from foot to foot, and even dipped its head in rhythm. Some kids clapped and parents laughed. A few people even recorded it, joking it should be the next contestant on a dance show. It was entertaining. People thought it was adorable. But zoo staff later explained the sad reality. This wasn't dancing, it was what's called stereotypic behavior. It's something animals in captivity sometimes develop. It usually happens when they're bored, stressed, or lacking stimulation. Basically, the bear wasn't putting on a show. It was stuck in a loop. That hit people differently. One visitor said, "I thought it was cute. Now I just feel kind of bad." Others nodded in agreement. To be clear, zookeepers do their best. But this behavior reminded everyone that captivity, even in well-run zoos, can take a toll. The upright walker. At one zoo, a chimpanzee did something so unexpected it stopped visitors in their tracks. It stood up on 2 legs and walked. Not a few steps, but a solid, confident stroll. At first, people thought it was just a quick balance move, but the chimp kept walking upright like a person out for a casual afternoon. It even carried a banana, yes, really. It held the fruit and walked with purpose, completely upright, like a tiny hairy butler heading to deliver a snack. It was weirdly impressive and unsettling at the same time. Kids pointed and laughed. Adults stared in silence. Some joked, "It's evolving." But underneath the humor, it gave people a strange feeling. The chimp's posture, balance, and casual confidence felt almost too familiar. Experts later explained that while it's rare, some chimpanzees do occasionally walk on two legs for longer stretches. It's usually linked to injury, learned behavior, or sometimes just preference. Either way, it offered a rare glimpse into how closely related we really are. One zoo guest whispered, "It's like looking at the past and the future at the same time." It may have just been a chimp walking, but in that short moment, it walked right into everyone's thoughts and stayed there. The bear that wanted some more. At another park, a bear discovered something remarkable. It figured out that if it held out its paws just right, visitors would throw more snacks its way. This wasn't a random fluke. The bear's timing was perfect. It extended its arms with a look that seemed to say, "Please, can I have some more?" The crowd was instantly charmed. Laughter filled the air as the bear repeated the motion again and again. It was almost like a master of nonverbal communication, cleverly asking for a treat without making a sound. Zoo staff later confirmed the bear hadn't been trained to do this. It had learned on its own by watching people and figuring out how to get what it wanted. That kind of intelligence impressed everyone. Of course, feeding animals isn't encouraged, and keepers had to remind visitors to stop tossing snacks. But in the moment, the bear's polite begging was too good to resist. One visitor joked, "That bear is better at asking for food than my kids." The whole scene was funny, but also kind of amazing. It showed that animals are always paying attention to us. They learn from our behavior and sometimes even outsmart us. And speaking of clever animals, the next story involves a gorilla who became fascinated by a smartphone. Smartphone fascination. At the Louisville Zoo, a teenager stood in front of a young gorilla's enclosure and held up his phone. He began flipping through photos of different primates. What happened next didn't feel real. The gorilla locked its gaze on the glowing screen and leaned in, completely transfixed. It wasn't just a passing glance. The animal stared intently, scanning each image with surprising focus. It moved its head to follow the pictures, as if trying to process each one carefully. Some photos triggered stronger reactions. The gorilla leaned closer, with its nostrils flaring slightly, perhaps recognizing a face or reacting to a familiar expression. Other images made it blink rapidly, as though weighing what it was seeing. For several long moments, the crowd stood in silence. This was not a typical zoo interaction. It was something else entirely. Experts say great apes like gorillas are capable of facial recognition. They remember individuals and understand cause and effect. In some research settings, gorillas use touchscreens to solve puzzles or select images. That kind of cognitive ability suggests what happened wasn't just random curiosity, it was something more deliberate. One guest whispered, "It felt like the gorilla was flipping through a family album." This moment was amusing, a little eerie, and deeply moving. But let's not get carried away and forget that really crazy and terrifying things also happen at zoos. The Jaguar selfie attack. In 2019, at the Wildlife World Zoo in Arizona, an ordinary day turned into a scene no one could forget. A woman stood before the jaguar enclosure, phone in hand, searching for that perfect selfie. Warning signs surrounded her, but she brushed them off. Maybe she thought the barriers were just for other people. Maybe she believed the animal behind the fence was tame. She leaned closer, smiled for the camera, and then everything changed. The black jaguar had been lying still, watching. Its eyes followed her every move. In a heartbeat, the calm turned violent. The jaguar lunged forward, its paw shooting through the bars, claws slicing into her arm. Her scream echoed across the zoo. People turned and froze, too shocked to move at first. The jaguar's claws dug deeper, pulling her toward the fence. For a brief moment, it looked like she would be dragged inside. Visitors suddenly snapped into action. A man nearby grabbed a water bottle and shoved it toward the animal, desperate to break its focus. It worked. The jaguar hesitated, giving rescuers a few seconds to pull her away. She fell back with blood gushing out of her arm. The deep gashes would need stitches, but she was alive. It was a miracle. Zoo officials later confirmed the obvious. The jaguar would not be put down because it had done nothing wrong. It had simply reacted as a predator would. The woman, filled with shame, returned days later to apologize. She told staff she had learned her lesson the hard way. The zoo kept the jaguar. The message was clear. Wild animals are not props for entertainment. They do not care about selfies or followers. For a few terrifying seconds that day, the jaguar reminded everyone of a single truth. Nature does not forgive carelessness. Now, meet the goose, who faced off with a rhino. And the ending isn't what you'd expect. A goose and a giant. Near a zoo's watering hole, a rhinoceros stood grazing. Its enormous body shifted slowly, with its tail flicking as it chewed in peace. Nearby, 2 Canada geese waddled around, seemingly unfazed by their enormous neighbor. Then suddenly, one goose flapped its wings violently and let out a sharp honk. The noise startled its companion and echoed through the space. The rhino suddenly looked up, and then, to everyone's amazement, it slowly backed away. The crowd watching could barely contain their laughter. It felt like a fairy tale reversal. David didn't just challenge Goliath, David made Goliath leave. Now, here is another. Cold-blooded mind games. 2 crocodiles shared an enclosure in a zoo's reptile exhibit. On this particular day, something shifted in their usual calm. They slowly began to approach one another, heads held low, but eyes completely focused. Their movements were deliberate and cautious. To the human eye, it looked like the beginning of a battle. The audience leaned forward, waiting for a clash of tails or the snap of powerful jaws. But no strike ever came. Instead, the 2 massive reptiles stopped just inches apart. They remained perfectly still. Every few seconds, one would make the slightest movement. A subtle twitch of the tail, a puff of air from the nostrils, or a soft hiss. The signals were quiet, almost invisible. But they were not meaningless. They were actually communicating. What the crowd witnessed was not a brawl. It was a psychological duel. Each crocodile tested the other's resolve without making physical contact. After a few tense minutes that felt like forever, one crocodile turned and drifted away. The other stayed perfectly still, as if holding its position in silent victory. This was not about aggression. It was about dominance and knowing when to engage or retreat. Reptiles are often seen as simple, instinct-driven animals. But this moment showed that intelligence takes many forms. Control and restraint are also forms of strength. A hedgehog and 2 gibbons. At the Lake District Wildlife Park, 2 gibbons were resting quietly in their enclosure. The afternoon was calm, and visitors watched them relax in the trees. That calm ended when a small hedgehog wandered along the path just outside their space. It moved slowly, its tiny feet barely making a sound. The hedgehog did not notice the gibbons, but the gibbons noticed it immediately. One of the gibbons screamed. The other leapt into the branches and called out in alarm. Within moments, both were swinging frantically through their enclosure. Their panic grew louder as visitors began to laugh. To the crowd, the scene looked comical. The gibbons were acting as if the harmless hedgehog were a dangerous predator. Meanwhile, the hedgehog kept walking. It did not stop or change direction. It did not even look up. For the hedgehog, nothing unusual was happening. For the gibbons, it was a crisis. Zookeepers later explained that animals often panic when faced with something unfamiliar. In this case, the hedgehog remained calm throughout the chaos. It continued its quiet walk while the gibbons shrieked and swung above it, unaware that their terrifying intruder had no interest in them at all. What do you think about these zoo moments? Comment down below.